Welcome to Theology in Perspective, the Bible teaching ministry of Dr. Daniel Woodhead. This program is dedicated to bringing you relevant insight into the biblical text that pertains to our time. Here is Dr. Woodhead with today's Bible teaching.
This is our 12th session in the book of Zechariah, and I'm going to look at the first 8 verses, which is the last vision in this series of 8 that he got in 520 BC one spring evening. And they all came, not at the same time, but one right after another, but they all came in the same evening, and they were all focusing in on a similar thing, to give the Jews some sense that God is in control, and yes, he's corrected them by having the Babylonians take them out of Jerusalem in 586 BC. And then he chose Cyrus the Persian, who succeeded the Babylonian Empire, to send them back. And now here it is, 520 BC, and he's giving them, through an angel that he calls the angel that spoke in me, Malach Hadober Bi, the angel that spoke in me. And I'm going to read, as we begin here, the first 8 verses, and then we'll go over them individually. And again, I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there came 4 chariots out from between 2 mountains. And the mountains were mountains of brass. In the first chariot were red horses, and in the second chariot black horses, and in the third chariot white horses, and in the fourth chariot grizzled strong horses. Then I answered and said unto the angel that talked with me, What are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said unto me, These are the 4 winds of heaven, which goeth forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. The chariot wherein are the black horses goeth forth towards the north country, and the white went forth after them, and the grizzled went forth towards the south country. And the strong went forth and sought to go, that they might walk to and fro through the earth. And he said, Get you hence, walk to and fro through the earth. So they walked to and fro through the earth. Then cried he to me and spake unto me, saying, Behold, they that go towards the north country have quieted my spirit in the north country. I'm going to start with just verse 1, talking about what Zechariah is experiencing, and it's a little different at the beginning of each one of these visions. And we have to keep in mind the spiritualized state here, or spiritized state, should I say. He's getting this information directly from the spirit world to his spirit. He's bypassing ears, sound waves, vocal cords moving, sight. This is directly to his spirit. And he, as we've seen, is exhausted after this. And we've looked at the passages in Daniel to see how Daniel experienced this direct communication and how it exhausted him. Well, Zechariah is getting the same thing. We don't know how long these visions lasted that evening, but they just exhausted him. Because the text says here in verse 1, And I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there came 4 chariots out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of brass. Now, as you know, I like to go back to the Hebrew here and look at the Hebrew, because our English translations, while they're good, and it's what we have, they still have limitations. Zechariah is in this spiritized state, and he is again being made aware. Here's another one. Here's another one. Another one's coming. And this angel that is speaking with him is he's not waking him up, but he's saying, come on, you got to look at this. You got to look at this. This is the last vision in the series of 8 that we've looked at. And it's important to remember that the Bible is one long chronology. One long chronology, and to fail to grasp that chronology through the Bible is to make it almost impossible to understand the prophetic parts of the Bible. Because we have to see that there's a beginning of all things and that there's an end of all things. The Revelation and Genesis are like the bookends of all the events that have happened on this earth that God wanted us to be aware of. And he is teaching us in these prophetic books where he is working, how he's working, and we have to be able to understand that chronology so we can place these events at the different points in the chronology. Otherwise, they don't make any sense. They just baffle us if we can't get that long chronology, that big picture in place first. There have been 7 visions before this. The first one started with the 4 horsemen. And the 4 horsemen here with the Lord Jesus on an independent horse directing this. He is the angel of Jehovah, the second person of the Trinity. And we remember back to that first vision. It was setting the stage for what God was going to do with the Jews. He wanted to give them that assurance that regardless of what happens on this earth, I'm still in control and I'm going to do as I have promised you. He took them out of the land. He never guaranteed that they would always be in the land, but it's their land. They have title to it. They don't always have ownership. They don't always have occupancy. They got ownership and title, but they don't always have occupancy. The second vision was the 4 horns, and it paralleled the vision that Daniel got of what Christ talked about as the times of the Gentiles, the successive Gentile empires that have controlled Jerusalem. And we're in the last of those right now. Even though the Jews have control of Jerusalem, it's temporary because the Antichrist is going to control it before the Great Tribulation starts. He is going to be controlling Jerusalem. And there was one other time when the Gentiles controlled Jerusalem for a short while, when the Jews controlled Jerusalem, and that was during the time of when they got rid of Antiochus Epiphanes, and the Maccabees took control of it. That was only for 167 years. And when you look at the long scope of this, going all the way back to 586 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar sacked Jerusalem for the 3rd time, these Gentile empires have been in control. Babylon, Medo-Persia, the Greeks, and then the imperialistic empire that was established by Rome, which is still in effect today. Imperialism is still in effect today. That was the 4 horns. The surveyor was the symbol for preparing the Jews for going back to Jerusalem and rebuilding Jerusalem under Governor Zerubbabel. The priest was a discussion of Joshua being anointed as the high priest. The menorah, there was the discussion of the branch. The branch, which is the Messiah and the king. The priest and the king merged together in one person. That was forbidden in the Old Testament. The priest and the king had different functions, different roles. Christ is our priest and our king. The flying scroll, while all the other visions before then talked about the comforting words to the Jews, he then has 3 visions following those first 5 that talk about judgment. And God is essentially saying to the Jews, and then in this last vision, to them, to the Gentile world through the Jews, I love you. I want you to be with me. I'm going to comfort you. I'm going to care for you. But I will not tolerate sin. Just because I am coming to you and telling you, I'm bringing you, the Jews now, back to Jerusalem, it doesn't mean that you can start sinning again, which they did. You know, God offers two means of his punishment, if you will, for sin. You can either let the Messiah take it, or you can go through the Great Tribulation. Now you got two choices. And it's far better to let the Messiah take the punishment, because then we have eternal rewards. You don't have anything the other way except eternal damnation and eternal punishment. And it's far better to take Christ. Far better. So he has three visions of judgment, punishment, if you will. And last week we looked at the ephah, which is the largest measurement in the Hebrew scales, if you will. It's a volumetric measurement, and it's about 37 quarts. And since it equals the size of about our bushel basket, people like to translate that out to be the basket, the woman in the basket. And we looked at that. We saw the judgment that was there. It was a judgment, when you dive into this, for the commercialism. And I'm not talking, there's nothing wrong with commerce, there's nothing wrong with business activities at all. It's greed and the love for commerce that surpasses your love for God. That's what he's judging. And he's taken that and its pagan roots, and the occultic pagan roots, back to Babylon. Started under Nimrod. And the Babylonians, as you recall, were just experts at this stuff. Experts at commerce and finance and math. I mean, they came up with mathematical theorems long before the Greeks did. That will be judged. Babylon will be the world headquarters for the Antichrist, and that's where Christ is coming first when he comes back in the campaign of Armageddon. So, in our vision today, it is a corollary to the first vision of the horses, and it's important to see that is sort of encapsulating all 8 of these visions with bookends, if you will, because the 8th vision with the horses is complementary to the first vision with the horses. Zechariah is said, look up, watch, pay attention. Hine can mean behold, it can be watch, look up, pay attention. And he sees 4 war chariots coming from between 2 brass mountains. And in the Hebrew text, it doesn't say mountains, it says the mountains. Hahar in the Hebrew. They've got the definite article in the Hebrew, and I don't know why it didn't get translated out this way, because it's important to know that. The Hebrew, and we do this in English too, we have 4 levels of definiteness for a noun. Like if I said a wife, it could be anybody's wife. If I said the wife, now you're getting a little closer to identifying somebody's wife, the wife. And if I was using that term and was talking about my wife, you'd know who I was talking about. Then the next level of definiteness is my wife, ishti, and then finally you attach a name to something, and that's the most definite of nouns. So you do the same thing with a mountain or a city or anything. A city, the city, my city, Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. So it's the degrees of definiteness, and the Hebrews identify this very strongly, and it's an important part of the text. Because when you put the mountains associated with this, the writer and the readers at that time knew exactly what he's talking about. Because if I were just talking to you and I said the associated with something and we all knew what it was, I wouldn't have to identify it specifically. So his readers knew what this was. And these visions are about the correction of the Jews, the correction and the vengeance that God is going to extract on these Gentiles. And we know from other texts, which I will elaborate on a little later, that this is Mount Zion and the Mount of Olives. Mount Zion and Olivet. These are the two mountains. And the area between the mountains is the valley of Jehoshaphat. Today that's the Kidron Valley. The Kidron Valley. And the Kidron, or the valley of Jehoshaphat, is Hebrew for Jehovah judges. Yahweh Shafti. Yahweh Shafti. And that's the Kidron Valley. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. The judgment of the Gentile nations that have oppressed Israel from their capital, Jerusalem, is what's being discussed here. Brass has extreme symbolism in the Bible. And well, first of all, it shouldn't have been translated as brass, because brass was not something that was even known by the ancients. Brass didn't come into being until around, I think it was 13th century. Forgot what I put in the notes. The 13th century AD. This is actually bronze or copper. It's probably bronze. Brass is an alloy of copper and zinc, and bronze is copper and tin. So they're different products, but they're very, very similar in their appearance. It has significance in the Hebrew text. Now, we've talked about this before. In Hebrew, all nouns have, and verbs too, have a root of 3 letters. And those 3 letters will morph into other words that are very similar but slightly different. So, for example, the word for to rule is malach. Malach. The word for a king is melech. The word for a kingdom is malchut. So they all have the same root. Well, the same thing with brass, and it's important to understand that, because it lets us see the Hebrew play on words, and you get that depth so that you get a better picture of what the text is saying. Because this was originally written in Hebrew. It wasn't originally written in English. I mean, I don't think the English language is even 1,500 years old or something. It's not that old. The word for bronze in Hebrew is nekoshet, and it's a play on words for the serpent. As the serpent is nachash, it's the same root letters, and it's a play on words. That the text in Hebrew is trying to give you more information by this play on words, and the Hebrew language is just rife with these idiomatic phrases and these play on words. The Hebrew word for bronze, as I said, is nechoshet. And do you remember back to Numbers 21:9, where Moses made a bronze serpent, a brazen serpent, put an end to the snakes that were killing the children of Israel. And they were killing them because God had ordained this, because they were so disobedient. The Hebrew word for bronze serpent is nekoshet nachash. Nekoshet nachash. Again, a play on words. Jesus referred to the life-saving nekoshet nachash, and he identified it with himself. Life-saving. Life-saving, because he was the Savior of the world. Now, we can see how these different words get multiplied throughout the Bible in a whole variety of ways. And as I said, the Hebrew language is just rife with these plays on words. The serpent is no different. It's got the quality of being shiny, luminous, and the Hebrew word for the bronze servant became nehushatan in 2 Kings 18, because it's got the same root letters. So the idea gets carried out into the New Testament, where Satan is cast as an angel of light. Now, the Hebrew is not used in the New Testament, but the idea of this serpent from the Old Testament, shiny, luminous, attractive. And the serpent originally was not a snake. That's a mistranslation. Serpent. It's not a snake. Because, we have snakes today, and snakes are reptiles. But then the serpent was beautiful. He had to be beautiful in order to attract Eve. Chava is her name. If he was ugly and a slimy snake, she wasn't going to listen to him. It's like we have this picture in Christmas, well, I shouldn't say Christmas cards, that'd be inappropriate, but cartoons that Satan comes as this guy in these red pajamas with a pointed tail and a pitchfork. That ain't the way he is. He comes as an angel of light. Nobody would fall for him if he came in the red pajamas. That's not true at all. He's a deceiver, and he deceives very, very well. He's far craftier than we can imagine. In the context of these 7 visions that we've seen in this one, we can see that this is a judgment of God that is coming. A judgment of God for the Gentiles that have persecuted the Jews for hundreds of years. It just gives us insight here. This bronze and the serpent, and God judging the serpent, and these plays on words. Without going into this even deeper, I just want to let us know that this is what this passage is talking about. It's talking about a judgment. And it's going to be the judgment in the valley of Jehoshaphat is going to take place at the end of the Great Tribulation, and right after it there's going to be 2 judgments of God. One is going to happen right at the end of the Great Tribulation when Christ comes back. We call this the campaign of Armageddon. Armageddon has 8 stages. It's not just Christ landing on the Mount of Olives and splitting it in half. That's the victory ascent at the end of the campaign. Look what Joel says in chapter 3, verse 2. And I don't know why, some of the chapters and books in Hebrew they organize it differently than we do. So in Hebrew, it's definitely chapter 4, verse 2, where he says, I will gather all nations and bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will execute judgment upon them there for my people and for my heritage, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have parted my land. And again, this judgment is going to come in 2 stages. The first one is going to be when he comes back, he fights the last stage in the valley of Jehoshaphat, and from the book of Revelation that the battle is so huge and the casualties are so huge that the blood that flows from the animals and from the humans runs for over 200 miles in that valley. And this is a big valley. And it's up to the bridle of the horses for 200 miles from Jerusalem to the valley, to the Gulf of Aqaba, until it drains. And then after that, Christ is going to have the sheep and goat judgment in the valley of Jehoshaphat, where he's going to separate out the Gentiles for the way they treated the Jews during the Great Tribulation. For those that helped the Jews, hid them, just like people hid the Jews during Hitler's reign, he's calling them sheep, and they go into the millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign of Christ on the earth. For those that didn't, that sided with the Antichrist, they're going to perish right there to everlasting perdition. They will be called goats. And, people have asked me, is the United States in biblical prophecy? Not specifically, but look what this text says. I will gather all nations. If there is a United States left at this time, all nations are going to come against Jerusalem. We'll see that later on in this book. And all nations are going to be judged. So if we're still around, if this is still a country, it will be part of that coalition against Israel. I want to look for a moment here at the next set of verses. And it's 2 and 3, where it's a discussion of the horses. In the first chariot were red horses, and in the second chariot black horses, and in the third chariot white horses, and in the fourth chariot grizzled strong horses. Now this is complementary to the first vision. There were 4 horses there, but what we can't see here is how many horses, because it's multiple horses. We don't know how many, but there's more than one horse hitched to each one of these chariots. They're ready to execute this divine judgment that's coming on the world. It's interesting, Psalm 68:17 says, the chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. The Lord is among them, as in Sinai in the holy place. Just gives us that imagery of God's power and control, and the fact that he has things under control, even though the sin that runs rampant in this world lets us think in our humanity that no one's in control. Look at all the junk that goes on. But all these visions that we've seen lets us see God behind the scenes. And I stated that right at the beginning when we started in this book. The book of Daniel talks about the Gentile control of Jerusalem. Christ called the times of the Gentiles. And the book of Zechariah shows what God's doing, even while the Gentiles have this control. And you saw this in the second vision, that the Gentiles have control, but God says, I used you. I don't like the way that you carried out my commands. You're going to be hurt because of this. This vision here of these horses is so complementary to the first one. As I mentioned, it's like bookends here. We're just putting all these visions together in one package in here. There was the beginning, and this is the closing of it. Multiple horses, both visions have 4 principal objects. Vision 1 describes 4 horses, and there are horsemen. From the context, you get this sense that there's horsemen, even though they're not identified as such. And this one speaks of 4 chariots, not 4 horses, each of which has multiple horses attached to it. But a little bit of difference in the color, and boy, people argue about the difference in the color. But the first vision, red, sorrel, and white, and then this last vision, they're red, black, white, and variegated, or sorrel. Spotted, speckled. Both visions signify servants of God that go forth to execute judgment. In the very first vision, we have God the Son, the angel Jehovah, leading the charge. Leading the charge. And this vision is clearly an indication of Jehovah's strength and his efforts to get vengeance from this world. The red horses symbolize war and bloodshed, just like Revelation 6:4. I'm going to tie this to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in Revelation 6:4, where the horses of the same color are being led out to extract vengeance on the world. And this is imagery that's used to describe God's actions. They're not literal horses that are going to go out and do something on the earth. No, this is God's way of giving us images of something strong and powerful that is going to carry out his will. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword. A great sword. This is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, when the great tribulation starts. The black horses symbolize famine and death. Famine and death. There is always famine after war because all the economic systems are disrupted. The food supplies are disrupted. The means of transferring food products from one region to another are disrupted. There is always famine and death. Revelation 6 verses 5 to 6 says, "And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, 'Come and see.' And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts saying, 'A measure of wheat for a penny, 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine.'" Now, I don't want to go into that really deeply because it's a discussion of economic disruption and a reversal of values, and the fact that people will hang on to things that are very, very valuable that have no meaning. Now, people will hang on to their gold, or they hang on to their jewels, and they hang on, here we're talking about wine and oil, when everything else is in economic chaos and people are starving and people are hanging on to this. Well, it's not going to feed you. But that's what people do. See, that's what we do. Famine and death. Now, the white horse symbolizes victory. The victory and triumph, if you will, though, that's seen over in the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is the unleashing of the Antichrist. And then there's another passage near the end of that book where Christ comes back on the white horse. The distinction between the two is the crown that they wear. Christ wears a diadem when he comes back. Again, these things aren't translated out into the text. But the Antichrist wears a Stephanos. And a Stephanos is a crown that's given to somebody that is a victor in an event, like an athletic event, or runs a race, something like that. And the text says in 6:2, Revelation 6:2, "And I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." So that horse, that white horse, just represents triumph. And here, in Revelation, it's a negative sense, but it's still triumph. And that's what that white horse symbolizes. The dappled, strong horses that are hitched to the 4th chariot, they symbolize death, but in a much stronger way than just famine. And the black horses, and this parallels Revelation 6:8. "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the 4th part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth." So the horses are identified with those when the tribulation starts in the 6th chapter. The visions that Zechariah is getting are not things that are happening all right now to him. Some of them are, which is the restoration of Jerusalem. The correction of sin does not take place until later. And remember what I told you about the Hebrew language. It has only 2 tenses. And it's a strange characteristic of that language. It has a completed sense we call perfect, or an incompleted sense we call imperfect. So while the activity that's being discussed is out in the future in terms of time, in the Hebrew language, it's given as completed. In other words, it's done. And this is where we get this prophetic, perfect sense. That God has said, not that this is going to happen, but that it has happened. It just hasn't happened in time and space yet. It's completed. It's done. In time and space, where we live, we're waiting for it to happen. But God says it's already done. That's one of the interesting characteristics of this language, the completed, perfect sense. It's a done deal. Try and think of it this way. God remembers tomorrow. God remembers tomorrow. He's done it already tomorrow. Because he lives outside of time and space where there's no time and space. So our English text in our English language has some limitations in that regard, but the Hebrew clearly explains this. The angel that talked in me, the Malach Hadober Bi, is now going to explain the vision to him, and even that needs some explaining. So Zechariah 6 verses 4 and 7 say, "Then I answered and said unto the angel that talked with me, What are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said unto me, These are the four winds of heaven, which go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. The chariot wherein are the black horses goeth forth towards the north country, and the white went forth after them, and the grizzled went forth towards the south country. And the strong went forth and sought to go, that they might walk to and fro through the earth. And he said, Get you hence, walk to and fro through the earth. So they walked to and fro through the earth." So Zechariah again asked him, this angel that's speaking in him, that word be means in him. And again, just like we said at the very beginning here, that this vision was not audible. He couldn't see it, actually. It came directly into his spirit. So while we have to use terms like see and hear and touch and feel and all that, that's not where this vision was going. This was a direct communication. And what this angel says, when Zechariah says, "No, I don't know what this means," he's saying this is judgment that's going out over the earth. Now he's clarifying what we saw earlier with the nekoshet, the judgment, that satanic judgment that's used to couple with the brass, and the Hebrew play on words. Now he's validating that. This is symbolized again by four winds, and the four winds stand before the Lord, and the four winds are these horses. Again, just more imagery to let us know that God is using some means. We don't know God's ways, so we have to use terms to describe things we do know. Suffice it to say that God is going to cover the earth with his judgment. These four winds just emphasize that this is going out in all directions. All directions it's going out. And it's interesting that the term winds is used, and other sorts of terminology are used that are weather related in the book of Revelation. Everything that appears in the book of Revelation has somehow or other appeared in the rest of the Bible. Mostly in the Old Testament. The reason why most people don't understand the book of Revelation is because they don't know the Old Testament. By understanding the Old Testament, and especially the Hebrew, the book of Revelation is not that tough. And as you know, most of my teachers were Messianic Jews. They were Orthodox Jews who became Christians. When they became Christians, they read the book of Revelation. They understood exactly what it said. Exactly. Because they knew the Old Testament. Whereas most churches today won't even touch the Old Testament. I don't know why. I have no idea. But these winds are symbolic about God's control. And we even have a New Testament passage where Christ controlled the weather. The winds. He stopped the seas. He controlled the weather. Here he is sleeping in the hold of this ship, and his apostles are absolutely out of their minds with fear. And he sort of wakes up like, what's the problem? Controls the weather, goes back to sleep, I'm in control, he says. I'm in control. Not me, I don't control anything. But God says that, and that's what we have to get out of this. That it is God that controls everything. But he lets the sin in this world run its course. There's an old saying that you give people enough rope and they hang themselves. Well, that's sort of what he's doing. The sin came in and he lets it go, and then he corrects. And for those that are his, he brings back in. That correction works. And for those that are not, he lets them go until the sin controls them, and they're lost forever. And the old King James in the first chapter of Romans calls that a reprobate mind. You sin so much that pretty soon your conscience doesn't work anymore, and it gets seared just like a branding iron, and it doesn't work. And now that's all you can do is profess what it is that you're sinning about as normal. You see this in a lot of different groups on the earth today. So these winds are symbolic of the chariots and the horses, and you get this sense of direction of the north and the south, where they're going. The strong horses go all over the earth. The other horses go to the north and the south. And God has assured Israel in these prophecies that I am going to extract my vengeance on these nations that have persecuted you, these Gentile nations. Most of them, if not all of them, have been in the Eastern Hemisphere, going up north and south. But the whole world is coming against Jerusalem, so these red horses go out, the strong horses, if you will, go out throughout the whole world. Some of those nations in the Eastern Hemisphere are Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Russia, Germany, and all the Muslim nations. They're all on the Eastern Hemisphere, north and south of Jerusalem. The words for to and fro means to traffic, to and fro. If I said the cars on Highway 31 out here go to and fro between Pentwater and Ludington, you'd know what I was talking about. It's another word for traffic. Traffic, moving back and forth, moving around. The 8th verse I left out because it would have taken me a long time to go through that, but I'm going to begin next week with the 8th verse, which is, what are those nations? What have they done? And how does God extract his vengeance? Because it's very clearly laid out in Jeremiah and Isaiah who those nations are and what he's going to do to them. Very clear. But it would have taken us a little too long today for me to go through that, so I'm going to pick up on verse 8 starting next Sunday. But if you look back from now of a period of 2,500 years, the Jews have been scattered, they've been tossed about, they've been beaten down, they've been persecuted, up to including the Nazi Holocaust, where for 12 years, Adolf Hitler and his henchmen set up concentration camps where they burned 6 million plus Jewish people. 6 million plus, and that was an industrial effort. I mean, those Germans were very, very good at what they did. I don't know if anybody been to any of the concentration camps and seen them. It's a mechanized system for killing. It wasn't, they started off shooting them. Boy, that wasn't fast enough. Then they started off, then they were trying to machine gun them, and that didn't do it. Poison them, that didn't do it. It was too, finally they came up with the Zyklon B, which is a pesticide, and they started gassing them, and that way they could gas hundreds and hundreds at once, and then they would have the Jews that were still alive take them out of those gas chambers and put them in the ovens, and they burn them. It was a process. They had railways set up to bring them from the ghettos. These Germans set up an incredible industrial process to do this. And lower Germany today, every nation that has persecuted the Jews has lost its sovereignty, has lost what they had. The Germans are nowhere near an advanced society like they were before. But the Jews got scattered starting in 586 BC. They went into all the different countries of the world. They didn't have a homeland. And in May the 14th of 1948, they came back, just like God prophesied in Ezekiel chapter 20. I'm bringing you back after a persecution and before a persecution. 1/3 of the world's population of Jews died during the Nazi Holocaust, those 12 years that Hitler was in power, from February of 1930 until May of 1945. 12 years, 6 million people. God brought them back. He brought them back. No nation on this earth has ever come back as a nation, as an individual people group, with the original real estate they have, except for Israel. No language that was dead has ever come back as a spoken language, a lingua franca, in Hebrew. And that's what they speak there. They speak Hebrew. It's a little different than the biblical Hebrew, because the biblical Hebrew to them is archaic, and they've got all kinds of modern terms, for computers and cars and things that we have today. No nation has ever come back. God swore that he will always love the Jews. Jeremiah 31, verses 35 to, it's supposed to be 36, I apologize for that. Thus saith Jehovah, who giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night, who stirreth up the sea, so that the waves thereof roar. Jehovah of hosts is his name. If these ordinances depart from before me, saith Jehovah, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. So the Jews' enemies ought to pay attention to that, because if they can get rid of the sun and the moon and the stars, and they can beat Israel. Otherwise, they're not gonna. It's not gonna happen. The essence of these prophecies, these 8 prophecies, as we close out this section of Zechariah, is that God is going to restore Israel. And they've only been partially restored now. They will be fully restored, and all believing in him at the end of the Great Tribulation. God's judgment are going to be meted out to all the anti-Christian and anti-Jewish people on this world, and he is going to usher in this glorious kingdom that we will talk about later on in this book, because there is a tremendous amount of text of the structure, the nature, and the duration of the kingdom in the Bible. The New Testament has very, very little to say about the kingdom. We know it's 1,000 years long. We know Satan is bound. And his apostles asked him when he was ready to go back to heaven. He said, hey, you going to set it up now? He says, not for you to know. Which obviously meant no. And there's a few references here and there to God's kingdom. Not his spiritual kingdom here on earth. He's invested all power, dominion, and glory so that all nations and languages will serve him. That's all God wants. Serve me. I'm your creator. I made you. And people just push him aside. Who's God? There isn't a God. Who cares about that? I mean, we evolved from something or other, some amoeba or something. That's not my family tree. I mean, I know I didn't come from an amoeba. His kingdom will never be destroyed. At the end of the Great Tribulation, the Antichrist and the false prophet are going to be destroyed. They're going into the lake of fire, Gehenna, and God's going to set up his kingdom on this earth in real time and real space for 1,000 years. Just like he taught his apostles to pray. People call this the Lord's Prayer. This is the Apostles' Prayer. Matthew 6, verses 9 to 10. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Amen? Amen.
We hope you have been blessed by this message today on a contemporarily relevant Bible topic. Dr. Woodhead has been teaching the Bible for 25 years. He is a pastor, an author, and conference speaker on various biblical subjects. Dr. Woodhead is the Dean of the Jewish Studies School at Schofield Seminary. His seminary teaching includes the Old Testament and Biblical Hebrew. He has attended Hebrew University in Jerusalem and a Hebrew College in Massachusetts. Please write us at Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan, 49420. Again, that's Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan, 49420. Or call us at 877-706-2479. That's 877-706-2479. Once again, 877-706-2479. Let us know if you have any questions about today's broadcast. We look forward to providing you with continuing Bible messages each week on this station. God bless you.